Welcome to Reality is Not Optional. I am your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on Reality is Not Optional, we are going to be going over Econ 101, a supply and demand graph. What is it? How does it work? And what kind of useful information can we take away from this graph and apply to the world around us? As we see on my screen here, I've already pre-drawn this graph. I didn't have to. I could have probably brought you through the whole drawing the graph, but that might take more time than it's worth. But let's look at the basics. The basics is that this graph is price against quantity. Price against quantity. And so this is mapping, every single point on here can be mapped to a specific quantity. And right now we're using variables because what we're interested in is concepts, not numbers. But any product or item can be graphed in this manner. Maybe it's Doritos, and the equilibrium price is $2.50. If you go to Walmart, that's like the normal price is about $2.50. And we could populate a whole chart like this for Doritos. So we'll stick with Doritos as the example. So let's figure out what these different lines mean. This is a curve. It's a demand curve. This represents how much people want to buy at what price. So let's pretend it's Doritos. How many people want to buy Doritos at $2.50? We go to the store. There's plenty of Doritos around, priced at $2.50. All right, I'll buy it. Sounds good. Let's say we walk in the store and Doritos are now $5 for a big bag of Doritos. You might think, well, I might buy it for that price, but that is pretty high for those Doritos. And so on average, less people are going to want Doritos at that higher price. So as the price goes up, people demand less. Let's look at that shift. So here's Doritos. Maybe it's at $2.50 over here, and maybe 1 million units are sold. So let's say the price rises to $5 a bag. We'll say, well, now they used to sell 1 million units. Maybe now they only sell 500,000 units, and the price is $10 a bag. So the price goes up and the quantity sold decreases. The converse is true as well. As the price decreases, so here's a price decrease, this price goes here, we'll follow this to the demand curve and go down. So the quantity sold before was QE, now we're selling Q2. As the price decreases, maybe Doritos are on sale for 50 cents for a family bag. Whoa, I'll buy like 3. Right? On average, people are going to be demanding more Doritos at a lower price than they would at a higher price. This is just pretty common sense type of stuff. You see how this works? So this demand graph represents these individual points along this curve. As the price goes up, maybe this is $1. Maybe $1.50 is in here. Maybe this is $2. Maybe this is $2.50. So each of these prices map to a specific demand spot on this curve, and that forms a line. So as the price goes up, people demand less. As the price goes down, people demand more. Simple demand. That's a basic axiom of economics, that the demand curve slopes downwards. Supply, on the other hand, is what happens when you're a seller. You're Walmart, and you figure out that you could sell more Doritos at $5 a bag. So it starts at $2, but would you rather have $2.50 a bag, or would you rather have $5 a bag? As the price goes up, you want to sell more. You say, hey, this is a good deal. I'm making more of my margins back. I'm making more money. I want the price to be high. You don't want to be giving away stuff for free. That's not a good business strategy. So in general, as the price increases, people want to supply more. Maybe Walmart has increased their prices to $5 a bag, and they're still selling out. The grocery store down the street sees that and says, maybe I should get into this Doritos game. I'll get some Doritos and I'll sell them as well. You see, more businesses are going to want to be selling that item, the more money that can be made from that item. So let's map that out real quickly here. As the price increases, or let's move from P2 to PE. So that's that much increase. Then you move from this many people wanting to supply it to this many people wanting to supply it. So as the price increases, look at that, more people want to sell. So that's also an axiom. This is how we get the supply and demand curves. As price increases, more people want to supply, less people want to buy. As prices decrease, less people want to supply, and more people want it to buy. And the gap between these is either the surplus or the shortage. Let's say more people want to buy something than supply it. Maybe it's a flood in Texas, and you have water, and the water's priced too low, and there's a limited supply, but a lot of people want it. So everyone's going to show up at the store, and is there going to be any water that people can buy? No, that's called a shortage. And the only way to curb these shortages is to price them at the market clearing price, where the same amount of people who want to buy it demand it at that price. Right? And so there's the shortage when demand exceeds supply, but if supply exceeds demand, what do we call that? That's a surplus. And often when you go to like Walmart, they're going to have that clearance aisle where they stock too much of something and it didn't sell like they thought it would. And so they have to put it on sale to clear it away. They have to liquidate it. And so that's making up for a surplus of things that were ordered. Their equilibrium price wasn't met, and now they're trying to get rid of this stuff. That is a surplus. All right, let's talk a little bit about consumer and supplier surpluses. As we see on this chart, there's all sorts of people who are willing to have done with less, right? So if the price was higher, there's all sorts of people who would have been willing to buy it at the higher price, but now all they have to do is buy it at this lower price. Let's say it's lawn mowing. Let's say they value their lawn being mowed at $30 an hour, but it's only $25 is the clearing price. Although they value it at $30, they are paying $25. Let's say there's a kid who wants to mow lawns. He values doing it at what price? $20. He says, I'll do it for $20. That's down here. But guess what price he gets paid? He gets paid $25. That's like pure profit. That's like getting $5 for free for just doing what you would have done for cheaper, but pure profit. Notice, that is just pure surplus. Things you get for free just because you're doing a transaction. And along this line, every single point, there's someone who would have done it for that different price, but is doing it for that higher price and is just earning pure profit. There's some seller who would have bought it at a higher price, but only has to pay the market clearing price. See how that works? These different triangles represent the total amount of surplus that these people get. And let's talk just a little bit now about those triangles. So this triangle here represents all the people who were willing to pay more but didn't have to pay as much. Right? That's just pure profit to them. That's called wealth. That's wealth creation. This other triangle down below it is all the people who are just getting pure profit in selling. I would have sold it for less, but the price I'm selling it at is just a great deal. It's just pure profit. I would have mowed your lawn for $20, but you gave me $25. Great, it's like $5 free. So all of that represents wealth creation in society. This is how societies become richer. It's not this distribution of wealth, this socialism. It's creating this surplus value, this consumer and supplier surplus, where people get things for lower than they value them. People sell things for higher than they value them. Trade makes people richer. Trade gives societies wealth. This is all pure wealth creation. So with this in mind, let's figure out what happens when the government... So let's talk about taxes real quick. What happens if the government passes a tax? Remember, our P1 is $35. Our P2 is $25 or is $20, and our PE, our equilibrium price, is $25. The government comes in and says, we will tax you $10 an hour per lawn that you mow, right? $10 an hour. So who pays that tax? Ultimately, it's going to be a mix. Even if the employer is paying all the taxes directly, he fills out his tax forms and he submits the taxes directly, some of that is going to come from what's demanded out of the supplier of the labor in hidden taxes, right? So it's people are going to take that out of their consumer. The government raises prices on insulin. They say, we're taxing you $100 per sale on insulin. Insulin's pretty important. And so who's going to be paying most of those taxes? The supplier is just going to increase the price of insulin by $100, and the consumer is basically just going to pay all those prices directly. But if it's something where it's a little bit more flexible, like for example, pop, let's take Michigan for example, which charges an extra 10 cents per can. It's going to go up a little bit, but the entire cost of the tax cannot be passed directly onto the consumer. It has to be borne by each party. The supplier and the consumer are each going to bear a portion. And who bears what portion depends on the shape of this graph. Remember, these are just hypothetical quantities. These are just hypothetical prices. And if there's something like insulin where the demand doesn't really shift no matter what the price is, that there are substitutes for insulin for diabetic people, maybe they go without. It's a painful option, but there is. So there's still going to be a very steep demand curve. There is going to be some shifting, but for the most part, the same amount of insulin is going to be sold no matter what the price within reason. So the people where the demand curve is pretty sharp, the supplier, the consumer is actually going to be paying most of those taxes. Where everything's more equal, then the share of the taxes is going to be more equal. Let's say this is the lawn mowing, and let's say this is a pretty accurate graph, and it is because we don't have quantities and prices filled out. Who is paying the taxes here? As we see, between P1 and P2, there's our $10. Our $10. It looks for this graph, because this is a very nice and angular graph with a lot of right angles, it looks like both the supplier and the consumer are going to be paying equal. Those people who are mowing lawns, they're going to be paying about $5 in those taxes. And those people buying the mowing of lawns, buying those services, they're going to be paying about $5 per hour. And this is no matter who on paper signs the government money, right? You can't target taxes. That's one takeaway from this graph. So even if you say, oh, let's tax the 1% and we'll put these steep taxes on them, you can't target a certain group. It depends on what the supply and demand graph looks like, how steep the demand curve is, and some of those burdens, a lot of those burdens in some cases are going to be borne directly by the consumers. So if you think you're taxing the 1%, chances are that burden is being borne by the lowest quintile of income people. It just depending on the shape of the supply and demand graph. So you can't target taxes. That's a good takeaway from this. And also, see what taxes do to our economy. Whereas before we sold this much, now there's a decrease in how much is sold. So less lawns are mowed, more people are inconvenienced, more wealth is destroyed, and less people are employed, right? Less people are employed. And both this consumer and supplier are made worse off. This entire square goes to the government. That's just the government's portion, and they just eat away from both the supplier and consumer. Right? Taxes. Good thing, bad thing. It's a bad thing because it creates deadweight loss, it destroys wealth, and then this is not even mentioning all these other side effects that come along with taxation, perverse incentives, and giving the government bureaucracy and the overhead costs of government. This is just, even if the government functioned flawlessly, there's going to be deadweight loss, wealth creation that is lost and destroyed in taxation. So moving on, maybe they don't actually pass a tax. They now pass a minimum wage. And basically this minimum wage says you cannot hire people to mow your lawn unless they are paid $30 an hour. Now who reclaims this triangle? Well, it is those people. Not everyone who wants to mow lawns. Remember, there's going to be a lot of unemployment. As the price increases, less people are going to want to buy. The supply is going to go up. More people are going to want to mow lawns, but less people are going to want to buy lawn mowing services. So in this new equilibrium where lawn mowing is mandated by the government to be $30 or more, this many people will want to supply, this many people wanted to provide. And the difference between these is unemployment. And notice, even in this scenario, wealth is destroyed. Minimum wages, price controls destroy wealth, the same as taxes. But the difference between this and the tax is who reclaims this triangle. All this doesn't go to the government, it goes to not every worker, but the workers who retain their jobs. Right? So let's say you increase minimum wage to $20 just across the board. Some people are going to lose their jobs. And the empirical evidence tells us that is true. People lose jobs. The people who gain are the people who keep their jobs, but that's not everyone. So minimum wages lose jobs. Minimum wages cause unemployment. Yes, you help the people who keep their jobs, but you're destroying wealth overall. You're making society poorer. You're taking people out of the job market, and you're really hurting the consumer, people who are buying this labor. Let's talk about price floors now. Let's say rent control in New York City. The government says, oh, you have to be selling at this and no more. Rent control, right? Is rent control a good thing? We love rent control. What's going to happen? Let's switch our colors up just a little bit so that we could see this pretty easy. So rent control. The price is kept artificially low, and is more or less stuff can be sold. Remember before, if it was allowed to free float, we would have got to the equilibrium. But now, since the price is artificially low, we are at a new equilibrium, which is lower. Less people are going to want to sell apartments when there are rent control in apartments. They're going to turn it into condominiums. That's what we see in New York City, San Francisco, anywhere where there's rent control on apartments. People convert the use of the building because they can't make money. It's not very productive. But some people stay in business. Overall, it destroys wealth. We've already talked about this before. But who gains all that surplus? The consumer surplus, the people buying rent-controlled buildings, they gain a lot of surplus. Right there, that's their total consumer surplus, and they gain this much surplus out of the hide of the supplier. Remember, we still got the deadweight loss. We still have wealth creation that is lost. And the supplier surplus is only this little fraction that's left. So rent control, price controls, minimum wages, they all do the same thing. They impede the equilibrium of our market. They impede production. They impede how much we would have had. They destroy wealth. So every time the government's acting, every time you're seeing things happen in the news and wondering how this government action affects some other aspect of society, if let's say Zimbabwe runs out of toilet paper, Argentina ran out of toilet paper, and before that it was Mobutu or whoever in Africa, they ran out of toilet paper. You sit there and think there's only one way that they run out of toilet paper is if they have price controls, and now there's a shortage. And sure enough, you'll read the article, and price controls are to blame. This is universal, happens everywhere. Price controls lead to shortages. Price controls impoverish people. People don't have toilet paper. It's a terrible thing. And they go around, they blame, oh, those capitalists, they just want to make money. You didn't let the market clear. You didn't allow people to make money. You drove them out of business with your price controls. It didn't make any sense to supply those items, especially with the government in the market. And so the government destroyed the lives of not only producers, but consumers. Because all sorts of people want this toilet paper, and they can't get this toilet paper. And now the entire country is destroyed. Thank you, socialism. Thank you, government price controls. So those were just some basics of supply and demand, how a supply and demand graph works. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put that on this YouTube page, and I'll try to answer them. Thank you for listening.